In the New Testament, when Jesus rises from the dead and he appears to his disciples, right before he ascends back to the Father, he appears to many more of the disciples than just the 12, several hundred. And it says that these are people that knew he was crucified, they knew that he was dead physically, and they were looking at him right here in front of them. They watched him ascend into heaven, ascend into this other world to take his seat at the right hand of God. And it says that some doubted. Some of them doubted. They were looking at him right there in front of them, risen from the dead, with the nail marks in his hands, with the spear mark in his side. They saw him ascend into heaven, and they doubted. And this kind of drives home the point for me that Jesus was making in the parable about the rich man and Lazarus, where the rich man is in torments in the afterlife, and Lazarus is in what Jesus refers to as the bosom of Abraham, or paradise. The rich man is pleading with Abraham to send Lazarus to his brother's house so that Lazarus can warn his brothers to repent and change their evil ways, so that they will not also come to that place of torment. And Abraham responds to him, "Let them listen to Moses and the prophets." And the rich man protests. He says, "No, Father Abraham, but if one goes to them from the dead, they will repent." And Abraham responds, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced though one were to rise from the dead." And I never really understood this on a more personal level until I began to encounter people and situations in which I saw real life miracles. Okay, miracles that had happened to certain people, miracles that were as verifiable as anything else that I would hear on the news or in the media, and some things that I would see even taking place in the lives of people around me. And when I say miracles, I'm not talking about like extreme coincidences. I'm not counting those as miracles, although they may be, but I'm talking about things that basically coincide with prayer or some other religious action that constitute basically a violation of the laws of physics. Something that could never happen, not even once. And so, you know, I would see these things happen, the laws of physics broken right there. And I was having extreme doubts. Couldn't say that I honestly believe, at least not 100%. Jesus had said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." And certain fathers of the church explained this verse that if one wishes to have faith, one must purify their heart of all evil intentions and selfishness and pride, because this is what blinds one to the presence of God. It's not lack of physical proofs. It's not lack of God demonstrating his existence in the physical world. That happens. But when a person who doesn't believe sees these things, they will, like I was doing, say, well, it might be fake, or it's not real, or it's a conspiracy. It didn't really happen. But something that does not prove the existence of God, that had an equivalent level of proof and validity based on the sources where it was coming from, I would have believed readily. And I thought to myself, if this didn't have anything to do with God, I'd believe this. I wouldn't have any reason to question this. It was almost like I didn't want to believe it. So I would scramble to think of reasons that it might not be true. I wanted it to be true, but at the same time, I didn't want it to be true. Because this idea that there's some other being that can control my destiny, and to which I'm going to have to answer for all of my selfish actions when I leave this world, it's not entirely a comforting thought. These mental battles go on, and I realized, eventually that maybe these saints are right. Maybe I need to purify my intentions. Maybe I need to struggle against my selfish desires. against my pride, against my lust. And maybe then, since God is a spirit, maybe the proof of his existence is a spiritual proof. Maybe it's in the spiritual world, and maybe since I'm blinded by my pride and my selfishness to the spiritual world, maybe that's the reason why I can't see him and believe in him. This is what the saints in their writings were telling me. They said, you can see all the miracles in the world. You're not going to believe unless your heart is pure. But, you know, a person who is proud, it's kind of like a self-defeating state of being to start with, because you don't have the right intentions and motivations to even start off on that path towards purification part. But the thing that drove me more than anything else, more than, I would say, maybe even more than the fear of what happens after one dies, or the possibility of what could happen after one dies, was just the emptiness and the lifelessness that I sensed inside of me. And I knew, when I was honest with myself, that I could get everything I wanted. I could get the perfect woman, I could get the perfect life, all the money in the world, I could achieve everything that I wanted for my life. And I knew on a deeper level that once I reached these castles in the clouds, I would discover that they were just clouds themselves, and that they were not real, and that it didn't matter what situation I was in. Didn't matter who I was with, didn't matter what I had, didn't matter what I accomplished, I would still be lifeless and empty inside. I knew this. And I knew that there was no other way that I could possibly seek the answer to this deep-seated emptiness, this deep-seated longing and yearning, than to start off on this path. And if it didn't lead there, if I didn't get the answer I wanted, I had lost nothing, because I had nothing to lose. I was already empty and spiritually dead, and I felt it. The pleasures of the world, the enjoyments, the fulfillments that the world offers were superficial. They numbed over and covered the emptiness, but they didn't fill it. I had to admit that to myself. They were distractions. They were not answers. Ask Jesus, the only one who promises to fulfill this emptiness, to allow me to see myself as I would be if my heart was pure. Okay, and if my pride for just 1 second would be gone. And I realized in that moment that the problem, all my problems in my life, which I had thought had existed because I was not getting what I wanted, whether in reference to my plan for my life or possessions or anything like that. The problem was not that I was not getting what I wanted. The problem was that I wanted it. And I began to see myself and my desires as a prison, and as like an alternate person that was not the real me. I saw my pride as this fake person that had come to inhabit the body where the real me should exist, and that the real me was dead. And it only by getting rid of this pride could that real me exist again. And the real me, when God allowed me to see it, I saw was so utterly beautiful. And I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about humanity in general. A human free of pride is such an utterly beautiful being that there is nothing that is worth clinging to, where that clinging is going to hinder or prohibit one from achieving that goal. And the word achieve, I don't mean to use the word achieve as if we earn it. I mean, be granted it by God. Be granted it by God. And any soul that gets the opportunity to envision themselves with no pride and no self-will will see for the first time, maybe in their life, maybe since early infancy, when the soul comes into this world pure, that the love of God only exists in the heart that is devoid of this pride, and that this love is so entirely different, and in fact antithetical to what the world and society call love and conceive of as love. And one realizes that most people that come through this world live and die never having known real love like the love of God. and that what they conceive of as love, it's a disgrace and a blasphemy to even compare the two. That in God's love there is no self. It is completely selfless. And this is how God loves us. God doesn't need anything from us. He gains nothing from our existence, and he loses nothing if we were to cease to exist. He's going to be him no matter what, and he needs nothing from us. And we exist. People always ask about the meaning of life. We exist to love him and to be loved by him. That is the meaning of our existence, to love God and to be loved by him. And one doesn't understand that until one sees his love and how different it is from our love. Our love is self. There's self-seeking. I loved people because they fulfilled some aspect of my self-concept, because they quote-unquote completed me, because they took away loneliness, because I enjoyed being around. It was all self. It was all about what need they were fulfilling for me. Emotional need, mental need, anything of that, any kind of need. And I realized that this was not love. What I had called love had nothing to do with love. This was attachment. This was clinging. This was craving. This was possessiveness. And it was a kind of affection that was, at its heart, though I would never have admitted it to myself, exploitative. Exploitative. And I saw that every kind of love that's glorified in society, in movies, books, music, is also self-seeking and exploitative. She makes me feel alive. She completes me. It's all about what she does for me. Me. And this is why the person feels heartbroken if the person leaves and goes and finds somebody else. They start to feel bitter and angry. And in many cases, that love turns to hate. That's not love, okay? In that moment, when the person leaves, when the person cheats, when the person ceases to, when the flame dies down, that's when the fakeness of that kind of love is exposed. Because real love doesn't happen. Real love doesn't die. It's not dependent. It doesn't need to be fed. The flame doesn't need to be kept alive. Nothing like that. Real love is immortal and selfless and real and true. And it has no element of pretending or anything like that. You know, there's no need to impress anyone. There's no need to fulfill anybody else's need. A lot of people in this world, they're not in love so much with a person. They're in love with the idea that that person loves them. It boosts their ego to feel craved and to feel wanted and to feel like this person's emotional satisfaction is dependent on me. Because in some sense, that allows a person to control the other person and to think that I possess this person because they desire me to this degree is exhilarating to people's egos. And that egotistical fulfillment is what a lot of people conceive of as love. Why would you want the other person to want you if it's love? That's entirely selfish. And the union that occurs, the spiritual union that occurs because of that romantic, erotic, fake love is not a real union. It's a mutual delusion and an illusion. I'm convincing myself that she really is impressed with me and all this kind of thing. And she, on the other hand, is thinking the exact same thing. She's not really enamored with me. She's enamored with the idea that I'm enamored with her. And I'm enamored with the idea that she's enamored with me. Ego. Pride. People don't admit this to themselves. I had never been able to engage in the kind of self-introspection that allowed me to expose the dirtiness of my motivations when it came to what I conceived of as love. And this is not just something that you see in certain people. This is what romantic love is. Break it down. Listen to people when they talk about their romantic love. They're constantly looking at themselves in the mirror, checking themselves out, making sure that they look perfect for this other person. Why? Is it really for the other person? Or is it so that ego rush can continue, knowing that, oh, I impressed them. They must have been sitting there thrilled with me. Meanwhile, they're sitting there thinking the exact same thing, hoping the exact same thing about you. Mutual delusion. And as soon as one finds somebody that can fulfill that need to a greater degree, give that attention to a greater degree, that egotistical attention seeking, then one is tempted to leave. And unless there's some stronger egotistical pull to keep one from leaving, in many cases people do leave. This is the number one cause for divorce: cheating. Okay? And again, the love then turns in many cases to hate. You see quote unquote lovers even killing over this. This is why in Greek, as you may have already heard, there are multiple words for the word love. And the agape, spiritual love of God, is not the same as the erota, as the eros, as the erotic love that exists between people. And it's a disgrace that these are referred to by the same word in English, because they're polar opposites. One realizes when one sees the love of God, which is the love that we were created to exist in and to be filled with, seeking pleasure for the sake of seeking pleasure in and of itself is antithetical to this, because the self is the enemy. The self is not the friend, and the fulfillment of the self is not the goal. When one sees God's love, the self becomes the thing that needs to be overcome and killed so that I can really live and be free. So in that context, and in the light of that realization, it would make no sense to seek pleasure for the sake of seeking pleasure. And it would make no sense to engage in any act which didn't have as its end goal giving. God's love does not desire to take at all. It desires only to give. And so every act, every motivation, intention, and every drive within a person becomes to give when one experiences God's love. That's the only thing one wants to do. One doesn't want to take or possess anything. And so in that context, one sees sex, the sexual act, as different than one used to see it, because sex obviously is a pleasurable act, but without the element which exists in sex within the natural context, which is to give life to another human, then there's no end goal of giving in that action if that can't occur from that union. One becomes, if one seeks God with all their heart, one becomes acutely aware, if God grants it, that He is sustaining their existence at every moment. One can sense this viscerally, more and more, that God is continually keeping me not only alive, but in existence. That existence is sustained by infinite love. The only reason why I continue to exist, or anything else continues to exist, is because God loves me and loves them. And it becomes impossible to even imagine loving anything or anyone except God, because one realizes that God is all things. And I don't mean this in like the Buddhist, like Eastern philosophy sense that He like literally, I'm talking about He is what sustains everything. Everything exists because of Him, and everything continues to exist because of Him. And one understands God as the source, as the ultimate source in the universe of all real love. It comes from Him. It shines from Him like the sun. It becomes abhorrent and absolutely disgusting. The thought becomes disgusting to the soul to even think of in any way altering the natural order of things that exist in the world, as far as like the way that God has ordered them to be. And the creation of human life and the bringing of human life into existence is front and center and foremost of these processes. The Christians who, destroy the environment, Christians who do anything that harms nature and the natural way that God has ordered things to be, you see that this is not right. This is not the way that it's supposed to be. This is not what God has intended preach. One can just sense it innately. That to alter in any way the process by which human life is created is to desecrate something very special. Now, I hear people making the argument, but it doesn't hurt anyone. And I would compare this to, like, for example, urinating on one's grandma's gravestone. You might have to go really bad. There might not be anybody else around. It might be raining, so nobody's going to know anyways. And it might feel really good. The nearest bathroom is a mile away. And it's going to cause a lot of suffering to have to wait to get there. Why don't I just go on Granny's grave? It would still be wrong because it desecrates something special, something very important, and something that has a special, I don't want to use the word sacred, but it has some kind of special ceremonial status. And anything having to do with human life has an equivalent importance. You know, her grave is important because it houses a body that used to contain a human life. And in any way to take that, twist it, pervert it to any purpose other than that is to desecrate it. When one seeks God, the answer to all these questions is to seek God. And if one doesn't seek God, one will never know this. And one will never be able to accept it. One has to seek him. And if one seeks him, one will find this and find all the truths to be truths. Which doesn't make sense right now, while pride still exists in the soul, and arrogance and reliance on one's own intelligence. Once one sees what love really is and what love is supposed to be, then this all suddenly makes sense, and you don't even need to hear it because it's written on the heart. I'm not going to sugarcoat and lie about the journey there. Even the half step that I've taken so far has been absolutely brutal. It's excruciating to deny one's own selfish desires, especially when it comes to sexual attraction. The devil is real. One has to learn to combat these selfish desires, okay, before one gets free. You know, St. Paul says the flesh always drags down to death. The flesh is selfish. And the spirit is created to be unselfish. So the two on some level are in conflict. The flesh is good. God created the flesh, but at the same time, in this world, in this fallen state, it is a hindrance. And it does have to be combated. And that battle is tough. It's really, really tough. I'm not going to say this is easy. You know, any Christian who tries to make the path look easy might be engaging in some type of heretical preaching, because this is not easy. It is a narrow and it is a straight gate and it is a hard road, just like Jesus said it is. And there are few who find it and enter into it and make it through. This is brutal. I mean, the kind of physical suffering that comes from denying one's sexual desires, and by denying I mean trying with all one's strength not to think about it, because that's where it has to start. You can't let those thoughts enter the mind. Once they enter the mind, the devil's got you on the hook at that point, just like a fish, and it's nearly impossible to get off. So the struggle to not even think about this, it's war. It's war. It's spiritual warfare. And some of the saints refer to this struggle as daily martyrdom. It's like being killed. That's how painful this gets. Trying not to look at these women. Trying not to think about these. I mean, it's murder. So the goal, the prize at the end of this war, at the end of this journey, is so precious that it's worth it. And again, that emptiness that exists in one without God is so profound and so tormenting if one focuses on it, if one has the courage to focus on it, that one realizes that it's worth it because one has nothing to lose. And if one could get there, and only God can grant one to get there, but if one gets there, it would be the best of all things. It would be the only thing. It would be beyond what the human language can even describe as far as how good and great and wonderful. So one sells all that one has to obtain that pearl of great price, as Jesus said. But it takes everything. If one keeps even 1 cent of one's possessions, One is not going to have enough to buy that pearl. And before one sets out to follow Jesus, one has to first count the cost. And it's going to cost everything. But God's love for you is pure. All people who love you because you fulfill some need for them. So it is not worth turning away from Him to love them. Choose Him. Choose Him. Not only that, but we're headed off a cliff. This life is going to end soon. None of us knows when. None of us is guaranteed tomorrow. The idea that there's any permanence in this life, the idea that our love is going to last forever, is a delusion. It's not. It could be over at any second, and when it's over, it's going to be over. God's love never, ever, ever ends. And for those people who have turned away, may God have mercy on their souls, but we have a foretaste of hell, of the abyss in this life, that void inside of us. What happens when the external world that God has created, that contains some presence of God, is stripped away? The emptiness, the darkness that exists in our hearts, and without any trace of God's presence, that darkness, that emptiness, that aloneness, this is our choice. We can choose to seek the fulfillment of that, or we can let the emptiness remain and just keep on covering it with one fake dream and one fake pursuit and one fake love after the next. Keep praying, everybody, and keep seeking, because this life is going to be over.